Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. How the heck are you? We're in February already. I'm actually recording this in December, the 22nd, so this is a few months ahead. How are you doing? How's the new year? Are you going to celebrate Valentine's Day? Do you care about Valentine's Day? This has nothing to do with Valentine's Day, just making conversation. Today's episode with Jen is kind of fresh. I thought this may have been the episode that we'd have to throw out that you wouldn't hear, but it actually went pretty well, so that's the good news. Today we're talking about when you have something that goes on and you're having a need or a wound is coming up and you tell somebody about it that you're in a relationship with. There are different ways that they can respond. I had something come up today and I shared it with Jen, but we talked about what if Jen said, gosh, you're just being so sensitive and how come you can't get over this? And would I make that about me, or would I know, oh, Jen's having some limitations right now and she doesn't have the bandwidth? And that ability to shift perspectives. And we often feel like one of us has to be right or wrong. Either I'm being too needy, or maybe it would be that Jen is not being compassionate and she's making it about me, or both things can be true, or only one thing can be true. So we talk about the different ways that that can show up and the things that we tell ourselves and the subtleties with language and the tendency to want to make things right or wrong, and how we can look at some of our defenses in relationships that we often push people away. We get quiet. We may think that other people need to change their behavior to make us feel better. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes there's something else going on. I just think this is a really rich conversation about the nuances and the complexities that can go on in relationships and how do we navigate that and how do we communicate about it, and the tremendous amount of intimacy that can happen, and how much strength and courage and vulnerability it takes to be in these places and to talk about them and to allow that into our relationships if you have safe relationships. I don't know. I think it's a great episode. I think you're going to enjoy it. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. I'm good. I'm okay.
Yeah?
How about you?
It's been a little rough today, but I'm okay. I can feel the tears in my eyes already.
Oh,
Yeah, it's been a little bit rough. The holidays are hard, not 100%, but they activate a lot of wounding for me. And I've been, I think, being pretty present to walking through it, but I didn't even realize that something was bubbling up today until I was talking with a friend. So I feel just, I feel vulnerable and I feel in it. And so I just want to name that. My life is much slower and much more simple and less complicated than yours is. And the holidays are bringing up a lot of stuff for me. And so there's been not really that much different space between us, but I'm feeling more into my feelings, my loneliness, expectations, and disappointments. There's some stuff going on with lack of attunement from my husband and sons. Not that it's intentional. Like, I get that it's not intentional, and it's still, there's some lack of attunement there. And it wasn't until this morning that I was talking with a friend that I was having this narrative in my head that I was too much for you, that some things are bothering me and I've been talking about them. So I've had people tell me in the past that I'm too depressing to be around. People don't want to be my friends. So that wound is there. So I didn't even realize that I had this, you're probably taking space because I'm too intense and I'm needing more than you can give, like I'm needy. And as soon as I was sharing this with someone else, I thought, oh, I need to get a reality check from you, because there's nothing in our relationship that's been indicating that. So I sent you a text and went to water fitness, finished water fitness. There was no text from you. And I had a little bit like, oh, it's probably true. And you responded and we FaceTimed and I cried my eyes out and did some healing work. But what I was thinking about is all the different ways that we can tell ourselves what goes on around this stuff. And I thought it would be fun for you and I to explore that today, because if you would have had a response that was unkind and said, you're right, you're too much, I can't deal with you right now, you're too needy, you're demanding, whatever I do is never enough, which is my fear of what you would say. And we talked about that. would that really be about me? Or is that about your limitation? Or is there some blend of them both? And I think that we tend to go into extreme thinking of either you reassure me and like I'm okay and I'm quote good, or you would respond in a way that would feel unkind and therefore it's about me and I'm too much. And there's so much more. And how do we heal these wounds and get in touch with them? And had you responded that way, how can I go to that place of, oh, you must be having a lot going on right now because you're generally incredibly compassionate and you don't have that ability right now to share kindly about where you're at and it doesn't have anything to do with me. So I'd love to give you a chance to talk and maybe we can play some of these out.
Yeah, it's funny as you're talking, it's making me think about something Marshall Rosenberg says about our language,
Mhm.
English in particular, but I imagine it applies to other languages too. He calls it the language of kings. And language shapes our reality, right? Like what we tell ourselves and how we frame stories. And so much of our language is, when he calls it the language of kings, it's who do I praise and make into a knight, right? Who do I knight? Who do I make into a hero? And who do I punish and throw in the dungeon, right? And so this, again, like we come by this honestly, right? This is what we're seeped in. So this pull towards that binary, that who's
Mhm.
right, who's wrong, is really deeply embedded into our language. So it does take a lot of effort to eschew that. Be like, no, I'm not going to make it that simple. I'm
Mhm.
going to look at the dynamics and the complexities. And it's all about perspective and what's going on and what's giving rise and what's in our context and everything else. Right. So I love how you said it's the reality testing, right? So if you had gotten a response from me that reflected being unkind or probably what would have been self defensive, again, like being able to create the space to know that, to not go into my own, oh, I failed. I'm not showing up for Patricia the way she needs me to. And so if I have a compassion, I can sit with us. And if I have self-compassion, I can be like, oh God, that sucks. Like I'm not happy, but I have space for that inside of me. But if I don't, that might get this sort of like defensive, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm doing the best I can, or
Right.
something like that. And hopefully that would have engendered a response to you, like, whoa, but it would have gotten out of that echo chamber of your head, right? Where you were telling yourself an old story.
Right.
And thankfully today, like I was here for it. I think I just a very simple text back because I was with clients steadily
Mhm.
until, I could text you. And I think it was really simple. No, not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love you. Thanks for reality checking. Nope.
Right.
And
Right.
do you want to FaceTime? Right. And then just, I feel like it's a very sacred role that we can play for each other and for others when we can really be that safe space.
Yeah. And I recently had somebody that I've known for a very long time, very close therapist, when I shared how I was feeling, and it wasn't this wound. And I don't think I was that identified with it. And I was told that they were confused and they feel like they always have to walk around eggshells around me. And so that's a perfect example of so it goes on in my head as if they listen to this, how would they feel? And I'm just going to speak from my perspective right now. That's about their stuff. It's not about me. And what you and I have in our relationship is this sacredness and honoring that we can talk about these wounded parts and really be raw and vulnerable. And that adds so much depth and intimacy and vulnerability in our relationship where we can show up any way that we can. That's what I want in my relationships. And I'm sure that each and every one of you who's listening has had somebody say something like, you're too sensitive. You make a big deal out of things. Why is this going on? I feel like I have to walk around eggshells around you. And that's not about us. And how do we go from that place of initially feeling like it's us, I'm wounded, I did something wrong, I'm too much. Having been in relationship, I'm sure every single listener has had a parent, a partner, a sibling, a friend say one of those things that's making it wrong that you show up the way that you are. And then what happens for me later on is then that part of me that goes like, wait, maybe this isn't me. And then I get angry because how dare you make this about me? which is what you may be hearing when I'm talking about this other relationship. You're confused and you have to walk around on eggshells. You have the gift of my honesty and me owning my stuff, and that activates stuff for you, but you don't see that and you always make it about me. So that's part of what I wanted to talk about today, because I'm sure that this is relatable to everybody. I see you having compassionate faces, Jen.
I'm just feeling it for like all of us. Like as you're talking, and I'm thinking of all different relationships that I've been in. And I guess where my compassion comes in is like, we have all been there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we lean into the limitations of our language are working against us, our media, our storytelling of so one-sided. I don't know how many movies or shows really show the same thing from multiple perspectives. There's an old movie that I love. Kevin Bacon was in it. He said, she said, where they tell the exact same story twice
Mm-hmm.
from each person's
Right.
perspective. So good. And, just as you're talking, and it's so painful. And it comes from just it's so sad. I mean, I don't really buy into like the whole good versus evil kind of stuff. It's kind of like, so in Buddhism, it's basic goodness against, and then ignorance, and often ignorance of that basic goodness, and we get so confused and so confounded. And it's, I remember being in a training, and it's like someone offering their perspective. And I think the trainer said to the audience members, of which I was one, like, if you can only see one side of this, like you're missing it.
Mm-hmm.
To really be able to take in multiple perspectives. That's the gift. And it is possible. It just takes some breath, some spaciousness, some knowing, owning our own perspectives, but holding it loosely.
And knowing that more than one reality can exist at the same time, which is really a gift of HSPs that we have.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of what I said to you this morning of, I have this fear that you're going to feel like no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. Am I coming across that way? Because I really consciously work on being as gracious as I can and giving you as much space as I can. But there's that young part and the wounded part where I've had these messages before. And often when it's coming up for me, I think I'm in my adult, but because I have this open wounded part, it's a little hard for me to tell. And I know that I'm not at my regular baseline that I normally am, but gosh, I'm working so freaking hard to try and contain what's going on. And we have that ability to see both sides. And when we have an open discussion, we can often acknowledge both of those things. And I think that's a strength when we can bring that into the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just kind of going through my whole history of like how many good people, sweet people, right? And just the depth of the misunderstandings
Mm-hmm.
because of the inability or the lack of skill or natural inclination to do that. I do think as HSPs, it is one of our gifts. I mean, we're always looking at what's the gift? It's our superpower. And it's funny, I was having a really, really cool conversation with someone about, and I've had this conversation with a bunch of different people actually. I used to struggle with myself, like that there's this nebulous quality to me. And you and I were just talking about it, like, what am I going to do tonight? Right. And I'm like, I don't know. But if I know what someone else needs, I can do that.
Right.
And I often fail to anchor in on myself. And the conversation I was having today with someone is about how much in our work in psychology, right, this idea of like ego strength and like having this solid and strong like personality and stuff. And my personality has always been far more nebulous.
Mm-hmm.
And what's my perspective? Like a lot of the time, like, well, I see a bunch of different perspectives.
Right.
And it's such a strength. And it is like, it took me a while to realize that that was its own thing. It wasn't just that I was lacking something.
Right.
That everyone else seemed to have and I didn't. I have something. It's been undervalued.
Right.
Historically.
And I think we have this tendency to weaponize both of those. So I identify with that place of like, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want to eat. I don't know what I need. So we can either weaponize that and say, I'm so wishy washy and I can't get clear on what I want. And how come other people are very clear and I can't? Or the other side of it is if I'm being very decisive and very clear about what I want, I can also weaponize that and go like, I'm too picky. I'm not flexible enough. I can't go with the flow because I'm very clear about what my needs are. And so if you identify with either or both of those, how can you reframe that so that both of those are a strength? That I'm either clear about what I want and I can be flexible, but it's also okay that I'm very clear, or it's nice that I'm flexible and can go along with things, and it's okay to not always know. I mean, I feel more comfortable saying me than you, Jen, because I want you to
Yeah.
talk about you. But I think that these are all areas where there's truth to both sides, but we've either been told you're rigid, you're inflexible, you never know what you want. How come you can't make up your mind? You're so wishy-washy. And how can we take how we're wired and turn that into a strength so we feel good about it? And even if somebody says it to us, we can reframe it and go like, no, I'm flexible and I'm just going with the flow. I'm trying to figure out what I want. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, coming back to what I was just saying about language,
Hmm.
right? Like, who gets to decide? Because really, it's a matter of the opinion of the king as to like who deserves to get thrown in the dungeon and how many
Right.
times are we wrong, right? Versus who do we? I mean, we love those plot twists in our movies, right? Like everyone that thought was the good guy turns out to be the bad guy, and that's
Right.
just it's just too simplistic, right? So, I think what you're talking about is that rich, kind of messy middle of both and
Hmm.
there's pros and cons to absolutely everything. And can we recognize the pros in ourselves and in our qualities
Hmm.
and do our best to mitigate the cons? And especially with like this idea, I talk to so many people about, oh, I made a mistake, or a lot of my parenting work. I'm like, every single parenting decision you will make, there's no right or wrong here.
Right.
It's just what does it yield? I mean, there are some, obviously I come down pretty hard on it's wrong to spank your kids. So there are some extremes at the ends, but all the other stuff, even the parenting decisions I'm the most proud of have come with that, oh, yeah, I got to mitigate that con that
Right.
comes with it. And so, can we get away from this right, wrong, good, evil, and more into, what was good about this? Who did it harm? That things are multifaceted all around, right? If you know how to do research studies, like if you're going to isolate one variable, you're going to give up information about other variables, right? It just sort of seems to be the way the physics of the world. If you're going to accentuate one thing, you're going to lose information about something else. So, what are we not looking at? Whose voice isn't being heard, or what story isn't being told? What perspective, and even inside ourselves?
Right. And then there's often a secondary nuanced voice of a good parent knows what they want or a good parent doesn't flip flop. There's that secondary voice that comes in that also can be really challenging to deal with. I purchased something for somebody that was personalized and it was on fabric and it's something that I love. It's a gift that I love to give. You're going to get one, Jen. So I don't really, you probably figured it out, but
I can't wait.
and I purchased this in anticipation of a holiday coming up, and then something happened, and it really helped me see that I tend to overgive in some relationships, and this relationship has some limitations. And historically, looking at I overgive and I don't receive that back, and at this point, I'm grieving some of what I expected the relationship to have, and it doesn't. And there are things that are redeeming, so I'm staying in the relationship, but grieving some of that expectation and that loss. So I decided that this was a great gift, except for the personalization on it. And so I was going to remove the personalization, thinking that it would be very easy. And it wasn't. It's a very well made item. But as I sat with the seam ripper trying to get it out and how tedious, the way that I reframed it was this is like unraveling a complicated relationship. And the type of work that that took on it and how I was recentering on myself. And every time I go to my car, I always have an armful of things. And like now I have a way to contain all those things when I go out to my car. But during this, I had this thing of like, you don't deface things. Like defacing the personalization was like bad and wrong. Was it okay to make this decision? Should I keep it? Should I send it back? You and I talked about, should I bury it? Should I burn it? Should I,
Hmm.
all of these things. And these are the subtle nuances about don't write in books, don't fold the pages down, don't do things a certain way. All of these little nuanced things that we've internalized that they kind of niggle at us. They're very minor things. And I've really been working on when I pick this thing up to take my stuff out to the car, again, it's like I'm refocusing on myself instead of focusing on being a great gift giver and thinking of everybody else. Like I'm centering on myself. And where are places in your life, listener, that you may overgive and be there and really attuned to lots of people, which is part of the pain that I'm feeling over the holidays, that I'm very attuned with, somebody runs out of something, somebody needs something. I'm like, oh, that would make a great gift. And then seeing that there's some lack of attunement in my own life. And knowing at the same time that the people in my life absolutely love and care about me. And if I'm very explicit about what I want, that I get what I want. But sometimes it's nice to have people that are just really attuned. And like both of those can be true. I can have sadness and grief that I'm very attuned to people sometimes. And sometimes I don't have that back. But how can you reframe this and recenter on yourself and your needs and feel good about it and have that awareness of, ooh, you kept something that was for something else. Oh, I'm supposed to center on myself. So we change those narratives that are, it's so subtle. And, even today, I did not realize that this wound was bubbling up, that so much of what goes on for me is, having a thought about something and then having to kind of have some distress tolerance and tell myself, like, it's fine. You're okay. Just do what you need to do. And I didn't realize that this wound was bubbling and bubbling and bubbling until I shared it with somebody, because I really, especially with you, try and stay as clean as I can. And I'm also really working on managing my own attachment injuries, which seem to be aplenty.
Hmm.
So, where does this show up for you, and how can you reframe it? How can you recenter on yourself? And what are those messages? And can you become aware of them and turn them around? Because I think we have gotten so many negative messages, and then we continue to do it to ourselves and don't even realize it. And so we really end up oppressing ourselves in ways that are not necessary, helpful, or kind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's complicated. I think a lot of what frees us up is knowing that it's okay to feel whatever emotions we're feeling. Because a lot of times I know that for myself, I'm more easily emotionally manipulatable
Hmm.
when I'm buying into, oh, it's not safe to have those emotions. I can't be party to giving someone those cause for those emotions or whatever it is, as opposed to, emotions come and go and they're all safe to just be felt and they carry information for us. One thing I like to ask myself, and I'll encourage my clients to ask themselves, is really like, what is the truest, most generous, and beautiful story you can tell about yourself,
Hmm.
in this moment or about what's happening, the most generous of spirit story while staying true, right? Because toxic positivity doesn't do anybody any good.
Mm-mm.
But, I'm human, I'm feeling. The wounding's tough. I mean, I think that to me, instead of the hallmark of a problem in a relationship, it could be that that's intimacy, that I know this about you and I am here for it.
Hmm.
And I'm going to be, a safe and sacred landing space where I can remind you who you really are. And there's some beautiful sayings about that. A friend is someone who will sing your song back to you when you've forgotten it, your heart song,
Hmm.
and that we can do that for each other if we cannot be defensive, if we can hear that, not make it about us, know ourselves, know, and that generosity just going around, right? I didn't have to beat myself up for this morning. So had this been 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I might have like, oh, what did I do wrong? Because Patricia's having these feelings,
Hmm.
and I must be at fault here because, again, language of kings, right?
Right.
And, oh, bad feelings are bad. We have to avoid them at all costs. So no room for having wounds or for understanding them or appreciating that. Like sometimes I'll call them like an owie, almost like affectionately. Like we all carry around these tender parts of us that
Hmm.
sometimes just get kicked up more than others.
Yeah.
But can we be affectionate towards that owie a little bit? And can we know who our people are that can help us with this?
Yeah.
I remember a long time ago getting kind of a crash course in this, and it was so clear it wasn't about me. And it took kind of an extreme circumstance. This goes back many, many years ago. My best friend in the world, my longest friend, had a real tragic birthing experience where she had a
Mm.
stillborn baby. And I had been there. I was like I was in the room with her. I was going to be her birthing coach and like right there with everything. And when this happened, like, oh gosh, I was already pretty service oriented and very much loved this person deeply and still do. And would do anything. Took off work, was going to be there, just anything that I could possibly do. And of course, such a tragic situation that there's not a whole lot that you can do except that gift of presence, that gift of emotional attunement. And what happened when someone's grieving like that, a few days in, weeks in, like, she became very angry with me. And it was very
Mhm.
bewildering. I couldn't tell why. And I was like I couldn't breathe right
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
her presence. And that's when it was so stark. And it was so puzzling that I knew this person deeply and well, and we love each other. And it wasn't that. And I was able to see that it was her grief
Mhm.
and that it was a sacred role that I was playing to be
Right.
the sort of the galvanizing rod, like the lightning rod. Because who are you going to be mad at, right? Like you can't throw punches at God, right? So there's your best friend that's like, and I was like, oh, that's what's happening.
Right.
And I was like, okay, like I can do this. I can play the sacred role. She needs this. She
Right.
needs to get that anger and just desperation. It's just so sad.
Right.
And I was able to really be there with her. And I have found that in my work. Often I'm tapped to be there for people in very beautiful ways.
Mhm.
And then every once in a while, I'm tapped for the not so beautiful. And it's all sacred. Like it's all
Mhm.
sacred work. And that taught me so much. I mean, I was in my 20s, I was really young and really learned from that. When you don't take it as this personal thing and you can really ground some of your defensiveness and you can sort of sink into that humility. So much is possible.
Yeah. I mean, that's beautiful that you were able to do that and to see that that's what was going on. And I think it's important to note that that was not a regular part of your relationship because I think people get confused of being in a relationship with someone who tends to blame them for all the things that are wrong in their lives. And so this is just another version of that. But that was not the nature of your relationship. And then with this loss came this anger. And because you were the closest, safest person that she felt comfortable with, you got the backlash of it because that energy needed to go somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And as mothers, we get this with our children,
Hmm.
being the safe place for a lot of that energy to come out. And if we can just really be curious about that with everybody. And
Yeah.
you're right, though. It's not, obviously, we look at patterns in relationship. And if it was an abusive pattern that was always making me the whatever, then that would be a very different story. You're right.
Right.
But in this context, it was so unusual. And it really took me by surprise. I was like, wait, what?
Right. Right. Did you
Yeah.
two ever process about that at some point in the future?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago now, but I know that we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love those people in my life, you and others that are really deep processors, and
Yeah.
we can go there. Yeah.
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 It's
Absolutely.
interesting, two things. We were with my kids this last weekend and we played this game where you draw a card and everybody guesses what they think is the most true answer for you. It really ended up being okay. There was one question and I can't remember what it was. And I pulled the card and I put it back like, I don't really want to hear what these people have to say about this because I think it's going to hurt my feelings. But my husband turned to me and the answer to one of the questions, and he was very tentative. He's like, you can be a little intense. And I'm like, I know, like that's a strength of who I am. I'm very
Yes.
intense. I'm very passionate about things.
Yeah.
This morning I was telling you that I've been pretty quiet with my husband because I've been in that place where it feels like if I could just externalize this frustration and make him do things a certain way, then I'd feel better. But I know that that's not true. And if I were to do it today, it would be, you're not attuning to me. And tomorrow it would be like, you're so focused on me. Stop focusing on me. That I know that it would make him crazy. And I'm convinced that early in our marriage, I probably did this because he's said, what can I do for you? I used to joke with my kids, like, just don't breathe the wrong way,
Mm.
when I'm in that irritable place. And it's not that it's just been challenging. And I've been very aware that that false belief of if everybody around me would just in this moment do it this way and in the next moment do it that way, then I'd feel better. And I know that that's not true. I haven't been able to articulate it until today. And so what happens is I just go very quiet and I notice things that are happening in the environment that are disruptive to me, but people have a right to be doing what they're doing. And it's not anything that's egregious. It just is annoying to me. And in my perfect world, that's not how things would go because we notice things, we pay attention to details, we're mindful about what we say and what we do and where we put things and how things are. But I have to tell you that it takes a lot of energy to contain that and to not be like, "Rah, rah, 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 rah," and to just internalize that. So I did have a nice conversation with my husband this morning saying, I'm struggling and I don't mean to be withdrawn and more quiet, but I feel like it's the kindest thing that I can do for everybody until whatever this is that's going on, I can move through. And it's part of what you were talking about with your friend of in that time and space, it was appropriate for her. Appropriate isn't a very skillful word, but that's what she needed to do in this situation. It would be unkind. I'm training my dog and it just feels like jump here, jump there, lay down here, lay
Mm.
down there, do this, do that.
Mhm.
I just need to sit with the discomfort right now and I am focusing on the moments that are going well and the gratitude and the things, to keep that balance. And it's not like a light, joyous, happy, free time for me right now. That's an okay thing. It's hard,
Yes.
but it's an okay thing.
Yeah, just to make some space for it. It is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So if this is resonating for anybody, I always feel vulnerable sharing these things. And I feel like who would want to come and see me if I am so open about the things that I struggle with? My hope is, and my intention is, that this is so relatable for so many people that are listening and that there's nothing wrong with it. And you can be a skilled professional who's able to help people. And it means that I really get it. I get those struggles. I'm walking the walk. And I can tell you that there are people that don't do their work. And you want to find somebody who's doing their work, that's doing it well, is willing to be, to use your words, Jen, be in humiliation to go, I don't know. I made a mistake. Let me take a look at that. That's growing, but it's so counter to what we're told that it can feel like weakness and something. I told you to, it just feels like it's a little hard being me right now. And when I'm
Yes.
surrounded with my husband and my kids and their partners, I do feel a little bit more different. And I have to assert what my needs are and how to take care of myself and to know that the holidays are going to bring up more time, even though you'll be hearing this past the holidays, but it's relatable. So, what can you do to take care of yourself? What do you tell yourself when this comes up? Are you able to have compassion? Are you able to observe it? Do you have a therapist or a coach or a close friend that you can talk to so that you find a way to balance both things, the struggles and the things that are going well? Because it would be easy for me to circle the drain right now. My life just sucks, and that's not true. It's
No.
both and.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I tell clients all the time, like, we're social, right? Like, we need that was something I learned really early on, too. Like, I remember just like totally losing it and getting on the phone and talking with, I forget who it was as a practitioner. She was really brilliant. And I think it was like a woman's like health person,
Hmm.
more physical, but I was reaching out and she's like, "Do you have some rescue remedy? Like, do you have, what are the things that you need to take care of yourself?" I'm like, "Oh, I can do this all day long for other people. And then when my stuff hits the fan, I need someone to do that for me, like to ground me." I actually have a lot of therapists on my caseload right now. And I always say to them, like, I am not going to tell you anything you don't know. And I'm
Hmm.
going to tell you because right now there's that part of you that's suffering and that really needs to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what do you need to take care of ourselves? And it does, there's no, I don't think we help anybody when we front. Like we always have it all together all the time. I think that's the
Hmm.
big myth and such a source of pain and perfectionism
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Well, you
It
look
doesn't.
around and you think it looks like everybody else has their stuff together and what's wrong with me because when there's not that transparency, and of course you want to be transparent and vulnerable in appropriate settings with appropriate people. But, our intention for sharing the way that we do here is to normalize and to validate that being human means we're going to have struggles. And it's not a bad thing. in the midst of this pain this morning, I told you how grateful I am for you. And as I'm grieving the loss of this friendship, I can see in the moment that, like, you're here for me, that what I'm grieving that I didn't get, I have in the moment. And so, can both of those things exist in the same moment? Absolutely. And to have that ability to recognize that, it's very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. We're complex,
Yeah.
right? Like I can have it. And then I don't know about you, but I might go through like a process of mourning for all the times I didn't have it, like in
Mm-hmm.
the past, even
Mm-hmm.
though that's not what's going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Mm.
had that when my husband and I got together, that of all the relationships where I did not have someone that was as present for me as he was, and I shed so many tears because it was healing. It was healing to have someone that was that present and loving and nurturing and accepting, because that was not my experience with men in my previous relationships or with my father. So those tears can be incredibly healing when you get something that you haven't gotten, because that young part is like, "Oh my gosh, this is what I've been wanting all my life and now I'm getting it." And it's joy pain.
Yes. Yeah. And the self compassion work, we call that a backdraft.
Yeah.
It's almost like when oxygen hits a fire. It's
Yeah.
like it can be very sharp
Yeah.
and just like, whoa, instant tears for me when
Yeah.
I have someone approach me in a way that's like not emotionally manipulative or that's like really attuned and can see me. It's like, whoa,
Right.
it's magical.
It's so powerful. It's so
Mhm.
powerful when we expose those wounded parts and somebody embraces who we are. There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're needing to wrap up. Is there anything else before we end, Jen?
I love you, my friend.
I love you too. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious how much of that resonated for you. I don't know. I think it's really relatable. These are things that with my friends we talk about. I talk about it with clients. Relationships are hard. Having needs is hard. Healing these wounds is hard. It's totally doable. And when you find a friend, a therapist, a coach that you can work on this, I think the healing that comes from it is so empowering and can really make a difference. Doesn't mean we still don't have these narratives where our gremlins come up. And sometimes, like today, it was kind of strong, but it's healing. So, my hope is that that's very helpful. If you need help working through some of this stuff, if you're not sure how to reframe, how to find the strengths, how to have somebody that you can communicate with this with, how to work on the healing, the wounding, Jen and I both see clients. You can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. We love helping deep thinkers and deep feelers learn how to thrive, to work through the healing, to have joy, to have growth, to have vulnerability, intimacy in relationships. Whatever it is that you're going through, chances are you're not alone. And sometimes the messages that we've received from our parents, our caregivers, partners, bosses, siblings, people we've been in friendships or relationships with, stick with us. And that wounding can run deep and it still will resurface. The volume will be louder or quieter. And for me right now, there are more stressors going on. And so I'm being impacted by it more. If everything else was balanced and there was one little thing going on, I wouldn't be impacted the way that I am. And it's healing that just needs to heal. And Jen and I would both love to support you in really thriving as an HSP. And if there are things that are getting you stuck or that you're resistant about, or you're not having the relationships or friendships that you want, you're struggling with work, with school, parenting, those are things that we would love to help you with. So you can reach out to us. And if not, that's okay too. Hopefully you have support and you're doing well. I think that's all I have. I hope you are doing well right now. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a great day.